Welcome to the Strategic Veteran, where we dive deep into stories of resilience, transition, and growth to empower veterans and service members to navigate their own journeys. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today's episode is vastly inspiring. Our guest today is someone whose life is a testament to purpose and perseverance. Dr. Tom Collins is a pediatric cardiologist, a leadership researcher, and the founder of 4-Star Leaders, a transformative organization dedicated to building exceptional leaders using science-backed principles. You might also recognize him as the host of the Science Leadership podcast, where he unpacks the art and science of leadership through thought-provoking conversations with renowned experts. Dr. Collins' leadership journey begins with a military foundation, a calling born from his heritage and pivotal historical moment. A fourth-year medical student on 9/11, he felt a profound call to duty, inspired by a legacy of service that ran deep in his family. His grandfather, a hero of D-Day and survivor of a German POW camp, and his father, a Vietnam veteran. Though much of his service in the Air National Guard and Army Reserves coincided with his rigorous medical training, his military experience profoundly shaped his professional bearing, instilling the values of foresight, discipline, and a commitment to servant leadership. Dr. Collins also witnessed the gaps in leadership and systems outside the military, experiences that motivated his groundbreaking research. Over the past few years, he's conducted an in-depth interview with over 51 retired 4-star generals and admirals, resulting in the forthcoming book, The 4 Stars of Leadership. The work highlights what it truly means to lead: character, competence, caring, and communication. These pillars define effective leadership and hold immense relevance for veterans transitioning into civilian life, demonstrating the value and impact they bring to any organization. Today, Dr. Collins will share insights from his leadership research and military journey and lessons from both triumph and disappointment, including the challenges of balancing duty with personal and professional growth. We'll discuss the importance of recognizing the skills veterans bring, what the civilian world can learn from military systems, and how we can all live out the 4 stars of leadership daily. So whether you're a transitioning service member, an aspiring leader, or someone who values growth and resilience, you're in for an enlightening conversation. Stay tuned because you won't want to miss the wisdom Dr. Tom Collins has to share. Dr. Collins, welcome to the show, man.
Adam, thank you for having me on here. It's such an honor to have the opportunity to speak with you and maybe share some insights with your audience. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited, dude. So, first question, man, where did you grow up, and what inspired you to join the military? Even though that's pretty obvious after the introduction.
Sure, yeah. I appreciate the opportunity to sort of share some of my background. So, I grew up in Appalachia, okay, in East Tennessee, in a tiny little town. Now I think it's probably got 200 people in it. An area when I was growing up, I think our county had maybe 18,000 people. No significant industry in the county, other than the Tennessee Department of Corrections, which had 2 prisons there, and my mom worked there. My dad was somewhat itinerant between different jobs and things, but I grew up in this tiny little place, and that really informed a lot of my experience and my worldview, still does. And then so my dad, he was, for better or worse, sort of the stereotypical enlisted Vietnam vet. He came back after 2 tours in Vietnam. He was a mechanic over there, and working on deuce and a halves and things. And so while he was there, he picked up some bad habits, made some bad decisions, brought those back to his life in the U.S. and that really wreaked havoc on him and our family growing up. But there was always that sense of duty, honor, country, and I guess if my dad didn't have a lot of things he was proud of in his life, but he was proud to have served, to have been in the Army, and he was from a big family, and I think all but maybe one of his brothers, he had 6 brothers, all but one of his brothers served in the military. And then, as you mentioned, my mom's dad was, Saving Private Ryan kind of scene, like on D-Day, legit, like holy smokes. And then was captured later by the Germans and treated very poorly. I think he weighed about 120 pounds soaking wet going into the Army. And after being in, he was enlisted. All my family had been enlisted. I'm the first officer in my family, but he was enlisted, and they didn't treat the enlisted folks too well. And when he came back to the U.S. after being a POW, I think he weighed 87 pounds, and he was kept at some facility for a while where they, I think, probably based on what I am given to understand, probably received steroid shots to make him look more normal because he was so emaciated. Um, and so anyway, so that background of just the service to the United States of America, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, um, was always there. Like just a part of the air you breathe, I guess, when you grow up in a family that honors that, right?
Well, I think too,
Where
your geography
yeah,
has something to do with that, right? I grew up in southern Indiana, so not too far from where you're at, and
yeah,
this is culture, right? Like, there's not, like you said,
right,
no industry to speak of, except for farming. I didn't grow up in a farming family. I just grew up around the farms, right? And
hmm
you know there's not a lot to do if you're not going to go into farming or you don't own a construction company and everybody, right? So that is the sense is service to country. Like, there's a lot of us from my high school that went, and that whole region, right? Like Indiana,
yeah,
Tennessee, Illinois, Kentucky, all of it is kind
hmm
of, you don't have a lot of options. Let's just say that, right? And I
yeah.
wanted to ask you. Hopefully, Helene didn't wreak too much havoc on your hometown as it went through there. I know Eastern Tennessee and Western North Carolina were devastated by all of that. So hopefully, everybody, any ties you have back there are safe and good to go.
Yeah, yeah. Thankfully, um, all my family are just west of Knoxville, Tennessee, so most of that, miss them and actually probably settled. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky now, and a good part of that settled over us, after it had lost some steam. So yes, but thanks. All are good.
Yeah, man. So you said you're the first officer in your family. That's a pretty big deal, right? Because I had an opportunity to become the first officer in my family as well. That honor goes to my sister, and good for her. Long line. My grandpa was a World War II medic. I don't know those stories. My uncle was a Vietnam guy. I can relate because he was an asshole growing up, just like I imagine your dad probably was. I mean, so much so that he and I don't have a relationship to this day, because when I joined the Army at 17 years old, he looked me in the eyes and told me I was making the biggest mistake in my life and it was going to get me nowhere. Well, joke's on you, buddy, because it's probably the best thing I ever did in my entire life. Did it come with its challenges and its shit moments? Yeah, absolutely. But
All
that's
good things
that's
do,
yeah, that's
that's the
life,
thing about
right?
it. Yeah,
That's life. You know what I mean? Like, life is messy. It's not this sunshine, rainbows, linear path that you follow. It's a fucking spiral that goes 900 different directions. And I think it turned out okay. Like, I'm pretty grateful for my service, considering everything that I'm doing now. You know what I mean? Like that.
yeah.
I have a great life, and I think my life would have looked a whole lot different had I not joined the Army and spent 12 years in it. So
Mhm.
it's just fun for me when I get to get a guy like you on that's from pretty much the same region of the country that I grew up in. I can absolutely relate to how you grew up, and knowing that there's no industry there. I imagine you felt like the Army was probably the only way out. However, you decided to go to college first,
Mhm.
and med school. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your journey through college, and what ultimately led you. I know what it is because you filled out a form, but the audience doesn't know. So let's talk about kind of your experience, and when you made the decision to join, and why you joined, what you joined, and all of that.
Yeah, so I growing up, I don't know where it came from, but there was always this sense that I would go to college, I would get a degree. I was always into science and did well in school and all that sort of stuff. My dad was I think he probably had a learning disability or two. Um, but he always was like focused on me being educated. He didn't want me to end up like him. So I would say of all of his foibles and things that he got wrong, he got that dead on right. Like he saw something great in me and he wanted to foster that. And so that sense of development, which I think comes from the military, honestly, like you can be better and there's a system to do it, right? Get your crap together and get after it and you can get better. And so he saw that in me. And so as I was moving along through high school, I actually toyed with the idea of trying to go to West Point and all that. I didn't know how to do that. I was a poor kid, right? And so who do you call when you're thinking about trying to join the Army, right? Well, you call a recruiter. Bad move, right? Because the recruiter's talking about checking a box, right? Like, how can I get this dude into basic training, or whatever,
tomorrow.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Tomorrow.
And so that didn't go anywhere, but it was still lingering there, right? And I went through college, and then as I was going to medical school, looking to go to medical school again. I didn't have money to pay for medical school and this sort of stuff, and so it's like, how am I going to fund this, right? So I funded it with a huge amount of loans, but at that point, I was thinking the military has a program where if you sign on for a certain number of years, you can repay and that. I actually didn't learn about that until it was too late. And my roommate in med school actually did that, and so he ended up he and his wife, after his training, went to Germany. Well, she was in Germany. He was mostly in Iraq, during that time. But anyway, so I'm a fourth year medical student. I'm just newly married. I got married in June of 01. All right. And we're there, and I did my training in med school and residency in Memphis, Tennessee. And we're there, and my wife is, during the year that she was between college and she ended up going to dental school, she worked at the tax assessor's office in downtown Memphis. Okay. And so she would go in. We were in this little apartment, and for whatever reason, I had a day off that particular day. We got one day off a week, I think, or maybe 2 a month or something. Anyway, and so I was at home. That was back in the days of like dial up, right? Like, and so we had this little laptop. I'm in like the guest room of the apartment. And I'm screwing around, doing something on the internet or whatever. And then finally I get off there and she calls and she's frantic. Like a plane has hit the building. Like she's crying and going on. I'm like, holy crap, somebody has flown a Cessna into a building downtown Memphis, right? Like that's what I'm thinking. Right. It's on the news, and I'm like, okay. I turn on the news literally probably, I don't know, 20 seconds before the second plane hit. So I saw that live, and my first thought was, we're going to war. Life is not going to be the same. Somebody's going to need to take care of those dudes who are getting their ass shot up, right? I can do that. I can do that. And so then and there, I started trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this, right? Like, I'm already about to finish medical school. How am I going to do this? So talked to different people. I knew a resident who was actually in the Air Guard in Memphis, and she was trying to, hey, you need to join us. And so I talked to an Army recruiter and an Air Force recruiter. Never wanted to be on boats. Okay. So I was not going to look at the Navy, but anyway, so, and the Army guy, he was about like, I don't know, 3 months from punching out, right? Like he had 20 plus years in. Dude knew it back and forth, every reg, the whole deal. Spit shined. He had his stuff together. The Air Force folks, I don't know, man. They did not have their stuff together. And so I was like, I mean, if I'm going to get my stuff shot at, I want to go with the guys who know what they're doing, right? And plus, most of the members of my family had been in the Army. And so I had predilection toward that. And so I ended up signing on with the Army Reserve so that I could be involved and start, toward that. I got assigned to a unit that was kind of like Hogan's Heroes when I showed up. It's like people had their boots untied, their pants weren't bloused, all this sort of stuff. And I was with that unit.
Did you join the Guard or the Reserves?
This was the Reserve, Army Reserve.
The Reserves, yeah.
Yeah, so my first year, I was with the Army Reserve. I won't say what unit that was because I don't want to broadcast that. But anyway, I was doing that, and I was like, I don't think this is unit, and actually, when I showed up, and they took me to the commander of the unit, and the commander said, "What is it you're hoping to get out of this?" I mean, my stuff was wound tight, dude. I was like, "I want to be airborne trained, man." Like I was on it, like I was ready to go. Freaking send me into the fight, right? And she was, "Whoa, we don't really do that around here," kind of response. So anyway, a year later, I transitioned over to the Air National Guard, remained in the Guard with the unit in Memphis, and then transferred once I finished my pediatric cardiology and advanced training beyond that in Philadelphia. And we moved to Arkansas. I transitioned to the unit at Little Rock Air Force Base, and that's where I remained for 12 years of total of time. So
for 12 years, you were with the Air National Guard because Hogan's Heroes really turned you off in that first unit. And I can't say that I can't say that I blame you. And, you're not the first. I've had several Reserve and Guard guys on here. I've had guys that went from active duty Army to the Guard, particularly infantry guys, and they're like, I can't do this. Like what you experienced, boots unbloused, shirts untucked, not shaven, not cutting hair, like just no basic military bearing whatsoever.
Right.
And then, you could probably speak better to this because I was never a part of the Guard or Reserves, but like a lot of those guys, they build these these good old boy systems because they work the same civilian jobs together. And so one of them will be the boss at the civilian job, and then you come to the Guard on drill weekends, and the other one's the boss, and it's just a fucking shit show, man. And I don't blame you for leaving. So good for you for realizing that's not where you're going to fit in, particularly like when you're wound tight like that and you're requesting to go to these skill identifier schools and they just like, hold up, we don't do that here. Like that should have been the biggest red flag ever. Like, okay, how do I get out of here? Because this is not
right.
But so you spent 12 years with the Air National Guard. Did you get to do what you wanted to do? Did you get to deploy and go take care of people, or?
No and yes. So, so after the first Gulf War, because so many people who were physicians who were in training got pulled and sent, Congress passed the law that said if you're in training as a physician, you're called a non-deployable asset. And so I was a non-deployable asset through 2010.
What?
Yeah. So from that whole time, and in fact, in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit, okay, I all but begged, so we had this chief master sergeant, and he kind of, he was the hand, he was like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, right? Like he's doing all the things behind the scenes. I was like, Chief, dude, let me go to New Orleans. Like this is why we're here.
Right.
It's like
let me go do my job.
Right. Let me go, man. And they wouldn't even let me do that, so I didn't get to do that stuff, but every month I'm the guy making sure that the people who are deploying are ready to be deployed, medically ready, making sure everybody's in shape to do that, right?
So you want to go do your job overseas that means something to you, and instead they just relegate you to being an SRP doc, essentially. Like you're just a readiness doc. And that's, man, I feel your pain. Almost feel it now. Like you're still kind of bitter about it a little bit. And
yeah, I mean, because I feel like, when people are like, oh, you were in the military, what did you do? I'm kind of embarrassed in a sense, right? Like I'm ashamed that, like, I mean, my granddad was at Normandy on D-Day, right? Like I was hoping to live up to that to some degree.
Well, I want to squash that for you, brother, because you volunteered to serve in the capacity that God gave you the skills to serve in, and you did everything the right way. And so, I would encourage you to let go of that, man. Don't look
Thanks.
at your service like that because you know it's not something that you should. It's not healthy for you. It's really it's detrimental to you as a human being to really kind of hang on to that. I mean, you did something that 0.1% of the population does anyway. You volunteered to serve your country and you kept volunteering to try and get yourself over there. So I think you should own that and you should kind of reframe that for yourself, man. Honestly, don't be bitter about it. You're not the first person that's come on this show that's felt that way. You're not the first person that I've had this conversation with.
Mhm.
One of them's a really good friend of mine now, some business opportunities between he and I. And I had to have this same conversation with him because he was in a similar situation in the guard, I believe, and it just never materialized for him. And that's out of your control, man. Like Big Army had something, better in store for you. However, I kind of would like to paint the picture mainly because I'm selfish and it's my show and I get to do things like this. But I've always been curious. I don't understand how medical school works. I don't understand where
Yeah.
residency is. And you're talking
Mhm.
about essentially for a 9-year period of time, you were considered in training. So can you kind of break down, particularly because we've got this opportunity, you were in the reserve, so you're still living a regular civilian life except for
Yeah.
once a month, 2 weeks a year. So
Mhm.
just for everybody's situational awareness, because I think it's important, can you walk us through, okay, you've got pre-med, you've got med school, then you've got residency, then you've got, I think you mentioned pediatric cardiology. Like I'm
Yeah.
sure I just want to understand, man, so that
Sure.
when I talk to doctors, I know that it's not really 8 years of school, it's like 16 years of school or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, and no shame in that, right? Like my family has no idea, uh, kind of what I've done, the training or whatever, and they've been at least adjacent to it, right? So that's a common thing. Yeah. So medical school. Let's say I went to college, right? I was going to be an engineer. Realized that was not my bag. Decided I would go to medical school. So I ended up changing my major, which required that made 5 years of college. Okay. After college, I went straight to medical school. Medical school was 4 years. So
So
I did
so
that.
we have to do basically a 4-year degree, get your bachelor's degree,
Right.
and then you can go to med school. And
Correct.
I assume it's a bachelor's of science, right? So it's not going to be a liberal arts degree. It's got to have.
Well, it could be. I mean, I had a guy in my medical school class who had a Bachelor of Arts in history from like Princeton or something. So you have
Okay.
to do some certain, science courses or whatever to prove that you can do that. But, I have somebody that I mentor who's now on faculty at Yale who has a degree in philosophy. That was her undergraduate degree, right? That is possible, but not common.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got a 4-year undergraduate degree, then you do 4 years of medical school, and so that's where you end up getting your, doctor of medicine. But at that point, you're like a GMO, if you will, right? Like you don't have any specialization or any really advanced training. You can't be like a family practice doctor or anything like that. So then you have to specialize, right? And so at that point, you you choose what you want to go into, and then you have to apply to this system where it's called the match, where you interview at the bunch of different places, and they'd figure out, who they want, and you figure out where you want to go, and the computer magically you open a thing one day and, oh, you're going to here, right? And so then that residency, that's where you become a family practice doctor, a general surgeon, an internal medicine physician, a dermatologist or whatever, right? And so those timeframes vary. So for some, let's say family medicine, pediatrics, uh, internal medicine, those are 3 years after medical school. I did a combined residency where it was internal medicine and pediatrics. So they take the 6 years, they take out 2 years of easy stuff, and give you 4 years of really, really intense stuff, right?
Let's
So I
drink
did
from the fire hose. Yeah.
right, right. So I did 4 years of that after medical school, right? So now I'm, what is that?
12 years
9
total.
since high school, right?
Right.
And then after residency, I said, okay, I want to be a pediatric cardiologist. I'm going to be a heart doctor for kids who are born with abnormal hearts. And so that training is 3 years. All right. And then after that, I said, okay, well, I now want to specialize even further and get more training so that I can take care of adults with congenital heart disease. Those kids who are born with abnormal hearts who grow up, and also I can do this sort of advanced imaging and this sort of stuff. So that was a year, an extra year of time for that. So I was nonstop training, okay, from
17 years by
kindergarten,
my math.
yeah, from kindergarten to 35 years of age, right? Like I was training that whole time,
That's
basically,
30 years of education. That's ridiculous. That's crazy because you start kindergarten at 5 and you're
Right.
finishing. So at what point, and this is probably irrelevant, but you said you had to fund all of this, through lots of loans. So at what point do you actually get the chance to start making money? You know, is it after med school when you start residency and then it kind of goes up from there, or is it 3 years into residency? Like that's what's always confused me is
Yeah,
like
sure.
these residents get to these hospitals and they're doing their specialties or whatever. They're treated largely like shit by all. I mean, it's kind of like being in an infantry platoon as a private,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Like you're just treated like shit for really until the new guys come in, and then you
Right,
get a little bit of
exactly.
clout or whatever, and then as you gain some rank and some respect and demonstrate that you can do the job, then obviously all of that goes away and it changes. You become a respected leader. Blah blah blah. Is it similar in the residency world?
Yes, but no. In that, okay, so to answer the money, like when do you get paid question. So I started residency in 2002, okay? And at that time there were no what's called duty hours restrictions, all right? Like they could say you got to work all day every day, basically. I mean, that's where the word resident comes from because once upon a time they actually lived in the hospital, okay?
Oof.
And so when I started, there were no residency work hour rules. My first month, I worked 120 hours. Okay. And that's with 1 day off a week. So all that, like, I'm talking about from 0400, 0430 to like midnight, basically. A lot of days. Okay. For a year. Um, and so I think I want to say I can't remember exactly my first year. It was somewhere between 28 and $32,000
after
that I
you
made.
after you just pulled almost $250,000 for med school loans, right? Like that's out of
Right.
control. Like how are you ever? No wonder doctors need to charge. So like I just
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
whole
So
nother conversation. I'm sure we could
right. Sure. Yeah.
have.
Yeah. That's a big one. And so yeah, you start making money, quote unquote. But my wife was in dental school, and so we're trying to like, I mean, dude, we literally scraped the treetops from probably the time we got married, 2001, until I got my first faculty position in 2010, and really weren't like at a place where it was like we can breathe till 2017,
Yeah.
you know? And thankfully I was able to get a hospital, because of my specialization, my capabilities and all that, they paid back my loans. Otherwise, I'd still
Yeah.
be paying that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I
So
do. I do.
yeah. So now you had asked about, does it get better, as you move up? Not for me. And the reason is because after my first year, they started these work hour restrictions. So now you can only work 80 hours, quote unquote, really that was not the truth, but you were told only to work 80 hours, right? And put that on the paper that we turn in or whatever. And so those folks who came in their first year, they were absolutely only allowed to work 80 hours. Crap rolled uphill. And so, ta-da, instead of getting to my second year and being like, oh, finally some breathing, no, crap rolled up. So I got to pick that up, right? And that just sort of happened all the way through my training. The crap just kept rolling uphill. So anyway, but you know what, Adam, man, was that first year, did that suck? Did it suck? It sucked. Okay. Like there were times I was just like, man, I
just want to quit. Yeah.
Right. I'm just going to tell them where they can stick this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That even when I was training to do cardiology, okay. I mean, I all in on that, but there were times I hadn't seen my daughter awake 72 hours or more. You know, it's freaking 10 o'clock at night. And after this case in the cath lab, I got to go do the report and be back here at 0500 or whatever, you know. Dude, I was a hair's breadth of what we call breaking scrub, just stepping back, tearing off the surgical gowns and stuff and tell them, I got an idea where you can shove this.
Yeah.
Tom is out.
And
but I didn't, thankfully.
I bring all this up because I think it's kind of important, like with where your mindset was. It almost sounds like being deployed would have been a welcome break for you.
Yeah.
You know, like that. I mean, like that's like, let's get out of this environment where I want to quit something I'm clearly passionate about. Let me take that passion and focus it, to our brothers and sisters that are over here getting fucked up a lot, particularly from, I joined in 02 as a high school 17-year-old. So I wouldn't go over my first time till the end of 04. And that would be every other year after that till 2012. So, from 2003 really till 2000, I'll say 10 or 11, the whole surge. I mean, it was just rough over there. We could have used guys like you for sure, and so that would have been a welcome break for you. I think it would have been less hours for sure, even though I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it really would have been, because the Army is pretty good about making sure folks, particularly with your skill set, are rested, right? Like are good to go at the top of their game, because lives actually depend on it. And
right.
I'm not saying the hospital isn't doing that, but the hospital is, let's be honest, they're about profit at the end of the day. And so they're going to do whatever they can to squeeze every ounce of profit out of it. Safety be damned, and I think that's shitty. So anyway, man, we spent enough time on that. Let's talk about your transition, because I think this is important, particularly, you talked about, and we already addressed this, but you've spoken about feeling like you didn't live up to what you signed up for because they made you a non-deployable asset, because you're in all this training to go gain all these skill sets that, in my opinion, are going to be extremely valuable to the military regardless, right? Well, so what was the decision for you to get out? At what point did you decide, like, hey, like this just isn't for me anymore? And what were the factors that kind of influenced that decision? I had a PA on my last deployment to Afghanistan, Captain Barker. I don't know if you're listening to this. I don't even know where you went after I got out of the Army, but you're one of my favorite people in the world, because you did it all. You were an infantry guy, then you went and became an Apache pilot. And then when they were going to promote you out of flying, you decided, like, hey, let me just go change my career and I'm going to be a PA. It's the best PA I ever had. He was a great dude. And he didn't give a shit about rank or anything like that. And all those career changes set him back in rank. So he was, on the Afghanistan deployment, he was a captain as a PA and had almost 25 years in the Army. You know what I mean? Because he was flying Apaches before that, and they were going to take him out of flying that. And he's like, well, I'll just take myself out of it, go do something that matters. So it's why I asked, like, what were the influences that led you to the decision to get out? Because I've seen it before, you know what I mean? And he ended up, I think, getting out after Afghanistan because the Army, at some point, and I don't know if this has always been true, had this policy they knew they couldn't keep good doctors, right, or PAs. They would have to let them moonlight in hospitals or clinics outside of Army duty hours, because there was no way they were ever going to keep up with the pay, the pay rates that these guys could get and all of that. So was this kind of a situation for you as well, or, what were all the factors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came down to, and look, Adam, I have wrestled with, oh man, why did I do that now in hindsight? But at the time, it was absolutely the right decision. It remains the right decision. But I was a faculty member, as you mentioned, I do research. My academic career was really going. I mean, going, right? Taking off in medicine. And people had, grand designs for that. Simultaneously, in the Guard, I was identified as a fast mover. Like, hey, man, we're going to make you the SGH, Surgeon General of the hospital, right? So like the physician over the physicians, right? And so, and I think you're going to be the next commander, and I think you could be the state air surgeon. I think, all this sort of stuff, right? And I had a wife and I had 2 kids, and my daughter was playing soccer. I was on call, which meant I had to be at the hospital rounding on patients at least once a month, the one weekend a month. The other weekend, I'm at guard duty. So I got 2 weekends a month that I'm missing my daughter playing soccer and doing these sorts of things. And the guard demand is going to be going one way, and the academic medicine demand is going the other, right? And so it came down to
A choice, really.
Yeah, like where do I go with this, right? And so the choice was, I'm going to go with academic medicine, and that was hard, right? Like, I mean, and we, brothers in arms. I mean, the folks that were in our unit, I still keep up with them. Like, there's some of the people that listen to my podcast first. They're the people who have read the first drafts of my book, right? Like, they're the ones that we just make ridiculous jokes via text. You know what it's like, right? I mean, there's just like, you just know, right? And you're like, you can, and there's something I love. Okay, this goes back to when I was in high school and playing ball and stuff. Like, there was this camaraderie about calling people by their last name, right? Like Collins, right? Like, there's something about that. And so in the military, right? Like, my buddy Colonel John Bondus is Bondus.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's special to me.
Yeah,
like,
I was Sergeant Pete for a long time. Just cut the RS off the end of my last name, Pete, everywhere, right? Like, which was endearing to me because that was my grandpa's name in when he was in the military, right? So like, I achieved kind of like, I didn't give myself the nickname, right? They just did it because everything's like efficiency. Yeah. So I relate to this a bunch, and I think this is super relevant because the number one thing that I've identified through doing this podcast and then having conversations with other veterans and other veterans in the transition space is the loss of identity and purpose. And you had a choice. You saw 2 paths, and shout out to Brandon Jenkins, who is a Navy helicopter pilot, and he's about to retire. He was one of my first few guests on the show. He's an amazing guy, but he's a coach, and he coaches on this golden path fallacy idea, right? And it's, the Army has it, the Marines, everybody has it. Every career in society has it. It sounds like you had done kind of your own, what I call looking in the mirror, sitting with yourself, figuring out who you are as a person. And you decided the academic path was the way that you wanted to go because that's what you're passionate about and what aligns with your values and your passion, or your values and beliefs, not the National Guard or the Air Guard route and their golden path fallacy for you. So thank you for sharing that with us, because I think that's important for people to see, right? Like, here you are, a lieutenant colonel, a fast mover, surgeon general of a hospital, which I assume is, an accomplishment that every, physician would strive to achieve. They want to put that on their resume. And you're like, yeah, no, I don't want to do this. I want to go do my thing over here. So kudos to you, because that's the whole point of this show, is pointing out we have a choice. We're all unique in our own endeavors and who we are as people. We don't have to be put in society's box and told, for example, in the transition process, here's how you write a resume, use your GI Bill, slap you on the ass, good luck, I hope you can find a career. Like that just doesn't have to be the way,
Yeah, right.
And so I think that you did it amazingly. So what lessons did you learn through your transition that you still carry with you to today? I'm willing to bet there's some lessons that you learned that you also learned from the 51 4-stars that you interviewed and then put into the book as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So as it pertains to my own sort of story, the sense of loss is real. But you can still maintain those relationships. I mean, I shared, right? Like I'm still, like right now I could text those guys, right? And we can make stupid jokes or make fun of each other or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we see that as definitive, as permanent, as irreconcilable or irrecoverable, right? That when I walk through this gate, I've cut that off, and that's not true. But sometimes we won't allow ourselves to see that.
Right.
And so it's recognizing that that's still a part of your story. Those people still care about you, and that you can still maintain those relationships and that sort of brotherhood of arms. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think a very real thing that probably a lot of your listeners wrestle with is the difference between military bearing, courtesies and customs, the way you handle yourself, versus what happens in a lot of domains in the civilian world, right? Where, I mean, is there duplicity? Are people playing games in the military? There are people who play games in the military, but for the most part, that will get you killed.
Yes.
So that's not a common thing, right? And
Yeah.
everybody knows who it is playing the games, right?
Everybody knows. Everybody
Yeah.
knows.
Yeah. And so there's this, I mean, you can, by and large, you can trust each other, right? And you know the landscape, the battle space, as we would call it, and then you get into civilian contexts, and man, that can change.
Big time.
And learning that, and recognizing that, and knowing that I got to find my battle buddies here, so I can figure out what the battle space really is. That can be a really difficult thing that I've seen time and again for folks to, because you like to think that people are true to their word. You like to think that people believe in duty and honor and integrity and character and courage and all those things, right?
Yeah.
That are woven into our experience in the military. Man, unfortunately, that's not the case, and that can bite you on the rear end.
Yeah.
So
did you experience any of this when you got out?
Well, I think because the nature of the guard, right? It's
You were kind of
happening.
already
It's
experiencing
ongoing,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so I was able to, as I was going along, I'm contrasting, right? Like here's the group that I'm with in this context with the military. Here's this, and seeing the differences. I think that it can breed. I mean, for me at least, I think that bred disappointment. It bred
resentment for sure.
Resentment is the word. Yeah, dude. I mean, nailed it. Of those people that behave that way, right? And
of course, yes.
And I'm not as I've looked at people and I've gone on in my academic career and things, I'm not a politician, right? Like I think that most of us in the military we are not around to screw around playing piddly games, right? Like
No,
we're not
not at all.
politicians. And so, finding now I know I've had enough experience to be able to suss that out, if you will, but finding people who can help you see the game that folks are playing and knowing how do you take these people and not to take them necessarily at face value and and try to figure out the battle space. I think that's really important thing.
Yeah, I agree. So you make it through the transition, and to no surprise, since you are dealing with the fuck games of the guard, like what you just described in civilian life, I've also seen that. I made myself unemployable by my own hand because I got tired of going to these jobs and having a VA appointment and being told I'm gonna have to take PTO to do this. Meanwhile, my coworker is gone every other day, and I'm the one being threatened to be fired for something I largely have no, like, how the VA works. Like, we just take the appointments when we can get them. It's not like
Right.
well, I would really like to have this appointment at 5:30 p.m. on a Wednesday because I know for sure I'm going to be off work then. You know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
not how it works at the VA.
Right.
Largely here in Orlando, it's great. The Orlando VA is one of the best I've ever seen. It's phenomenal, but I still have certain troubles where, for example, the dentist, you know what I mean? I made a dentist
Yeah.
appointment last August. I'm still working on finishing up those visits, and we're going into 2025, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's a prime example of the bullshit that you're talking about that happens in the civilian workspace, if you will. So what did you decide you were going to do? Obviously, you've got all this academic, medical school training. You're a pediatric cardiologist, and you said internal medicine. I don't want to. I'm trying not to mess this up, man. Like, I really don't.
Yeah, no. That's okay. It's
You've got
yeah,
all these.
pediatric cardiologist. Yeah.
You got these amazing skills. So were you already working? I assume you were working in a hospital in that field. So you had the civilian job. So it was probably a
Mhm.
pretty easy transition for you in that regard. You're probably dealing more with kind of that, like, we refuse to kind of see that we can maintain those relationships like you described before, right? Like, that stuff can go on. It doesn't have to be the end. We sabotage
Yeah.
ourselves a lot in that. So
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how to get to. You've got so much shit going on, so much advanced shit. Like, I know that I'm not capable of learning internal medicine and cardiology and being a surgeon general at a hospital and in charge of people. And I know this because I was trying to get my bachelor's degree while I was trying to get a multi-engine rating, while I was also trying to become a CFI. And that, while it may not sound hard to some people, I would equate that to just as hard as learning cardiology, internal medicine, and getting a bachelor's degree at the same time. Like, CFI is the hardest thing you will do in aviation.
Mhm.
Multi is really kind of building on the foundational skills that you learned in flight school, but adding so much more in the cockpit that you just need to get, or you're just not going to get it. You know what I mean? And it's
Mhm.
expensive, right? So you've got all those factors. So I would equate them in level of difficulty as kind of the same. So my question becomes, now you want to add this work with 4-star leaders and getting into
Yeah.
leadership and all of that. Like, how do you have the capacity to do this? And how do you structure your life so that you combat the imposter syndrome, right? Because I'm sure you dealt with that a lot. You don't overanalyze and you take action, but also, like, how do you just manage all of this? Like, you've got so much going on.
Yeah. I tend to be pretty good about not needing a huge amount of sleep. That's first that's first off. But
But
um
as a doctor, I know
sure.
sleep matters. Like,
Yeah.
you
Right.
can't say, like, oh, well, I don't need a lot of sleep, because I'm an infantry guy who went to war a bunch. I don't need a lot of
Yeah.
sleep either, but it's also
Yeah.
detrimental to my health.
Sure. No, you're right. I think that the biggest thing for me has been efficiency. Like and uh, when I'm on the clock, I am working. Like there are people who piddle around or whatever. Dude, I'm grinding. Like
Yeah.
so so that I'm really efficient in getting stuff done. Also, if there's a talent or capability that I have that I think is innate, it's the ability to write. And so writing and thinking in those ways is easy for me, which makes things flow, and I don't spend a lot of time kind of spinning my wheels and that sort of thing. So that I think that has been very beneficial. And and the reality is you sacrifice somewhere, right? And so it gets back to, okay, well, how much time can I take away from something, my family sometimes or whatever it is, for this perceived thing down the road, right?
I see. This is so important. I love this because delayed gratification and the ability to sacrifice in the short term to get what you want in the long term. I
Yeah,
talk about this ad nauseum because it's the two most important things. If you cannot delay gratification and you can't sacrifice in the short term for what you want in the long term, you're never going to get to where you want to go.
yeah. 100%. I mean, that's the sake, the case with medicine, right? Like folks say, "Oh, they want to be a doctor, so they're going to be rich." Look, if I wanted to be rich, I wouldn't have gone into medical school. I would have gone into business, started some business right out of college or during college, and I'd be freaking loaded now,
Right.
right? Like in the
Right.
same amount of time. So, but it's this, okay, I can see 15, 20 years from now I'll be in a good spot, right? Like, and so, I mean, it's to the point, like, I think it's become part of just who I am. Like, all right, yesterday, I don't know what our time lag is on, so you can edit this out if you need, but yesterday is Christmas, right? My kids go insane because I'm always like, hey, what if we just save a present until, I don't know, June? Let's just have it sitting there until June. Like, I would personally, I think that would be fun because then I'm always anticipating it, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, dude, it's gonna be awesome in June because that one we're gonna open, right? And they just lose their mind like that. You're crazy, but it's become part of my makeup. This delayed gratification, like I can do that really, really well. And I think that's part of how I've gotten, through my training and all that sort of stuff, is I'm able to go, it sucks right now, but I know that down the road, this is going to pay off huge. I just got to keep taking it one step at a time, work the process, and we'll get there,
And it goes back to that. Everything that I am building is based off of one fundamental thing, and that's discipline. Because discipline is the only thing that will never leave you. It'll never let you down. It's always, always there for you. And that's what you're talking about. It's just having the discipline to realize this fucking sucks. I really fucking hate this, but I can see the other side of this. So if I just stay disciplined and show up every day, give it just 1%, 1% every day,
Mhm.
like I will get to where I'm going. And I've learned this lesson over the last year. I started this podcast in May. We have recorded over 102 episodes. It's December 26th. We've only released 36 of them because I'm behind. I'm a one man show. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot, but
Yeah.
like not only that, but then starting on LinkedIn in November of 2023 to November of 2024, seeing that I went from 92 to 6,000 followers or connections, and not just connections, but built a solid network of people. Like my phone blew up yesterday on Christmas with people from the network that I've had on the podcast that I've had meetings or conversations with to learn. And it's just been amazing to see what I can do. And while largely for that whole year I was miserable because I was like, nothing I'm doing is working. I'm not seeing the results of anything. It's like you wake up one day and there's an inbox full of emails. Your phone is blown up with text messages from people that are in your network. You're getting opportunity, which I can't talk about yet because I got some big things coming for the next year. But like all of this because I just kept showing up every day,
Yeah.
was disciplined enough to put in some kind of work, whether it was my best work or it was subpar work. I still worked. And I just let go of all of, kind of those expectations of the future, knowing that this is what gets me to that future,
Yeah.
and so let's talk about your work with 4-star leaders. What is 4-star leaders? Where did you get the idea? And how big is this stuff going to be? I love leadership. for whatever reason, I never considered myself a good leader. I talk about it often. I had a mediocre career. I need to take my own advice, like I gave you earlier. Like don't discount your service or
Yeah.
whatever. But part of it for me is the self awareness that I've attained over the last year after my ayahuasca experience and kind of learning some things about myself. I look at it, through a different lens and like, man, if I'd have known the things I know now about myself, my career would have been so much better. But I also can't hang on to that because it does me no good to live in the past. It's moving forward and the future. And dude, I get to be a leader of military members now.
Yeah.
And that's the coolest part. Like I enjoyed leading soldiers. I still have a couple of in March, I get to go to Fort Benning and I get to watch like me made over graduate drill school, you know what I mean? And then shortly after that, I get to Penham E7, which is going to be amazing. You know what I mean? And like I was the first phone call that guy gave me, which should speak volumes to my leadership. But for whatever reason, I've got this block that doesn't allow me to see that from time to time. So I'm fascinated by everything leadership. I can't wait till the book's out because I'm going to beg you for a signed copy and then read it. Like I just want to know everything. Like, what did you find talking to these 4-star generals? Where did you get the idea to approach these 4-star generals, and what is the plan with all of it, man?
Yeah. So, well, I really appreciate you, man. I love talking about this stuff because it's so crazy to me. Okay, and this is the thing of, if you have a really good idea, dude, if you pursue that thing and you dedicate yourself to it, wow, what you can do, right? So as I was going through all this training I talked about, right? People always peg me, oh, one day you're going to be a division chief, meaning you're going to be the leader of the cardiologists, and maybe a department chair, meaning you're going to lead all the pediatricians and all that sort of stuff in a given hospital or university or whatever. I wasn't sure about that, but in 2018, after hearing enough of that, I decided, okay, if that is possibly true, I'm gonna dedicate my personal reading time. So I have a stationary bicycle. I ride that thing probably 5 times a week, 90 minutes at a time, and the whole time I'm reading. And I'm a nonfiction reader, so I used to read all sorts of theology and biographies and all sorts of stuff, right? But in March 2018, I made this decision. I'm gonna start reading leadership stuff. So fast forward to about fall of 19, I'd read about 130 books on leadership. Okay. And I felt like I got my hands around this. Like I think I know all the big principles. I know all the concepts of leadership, at least what's published, and in that. And I said, there are probably things, this gets, unknown unknowns, right? Rumsfeld talked about that, but there are probably things I don't know that I don't know. I'm going to see if I can find a master's degree in leadership that I can do online, because I think that would be valuable for me to have a formal framework. And so I looked around. I found that the Citadel has a great master's leadership program. So I started doing that. During that program, I continued to do all this leadership reading and all that, obviously, and writing papers on it and so forth. I got this crazy idea. I said, what would be the leadership book I would most like to read? It would be a book, The Wisdom of 4-Star Generals, the leadership wisdom of 4-star generals, right? Like that would be freaking awesome, right? Because most of us, there are people in the military certainly who are bitter about certain 4 stars and and all that. But most of us recognize that to be a 4-star, you have to have gone through it. You have to demonstrate yourself to be somebody who really has a lot of capability and so forth, right? And so most of those people are held in very high regard, and they've just seen so much and done so much, and that would be an awesome book to read. And nobody had done that really. And so I was like, okay, how the hell do you get in contact with a 4-star general, right? Because it's not like they post that stuff on the internet or something, right? And a lot of them don't even have internet presence because of security issues. And so I knew a guy who knew Wesley Clark, and I thought, well, maybe I could get going that way, and that fell through. So it was probably after a little while, I was just like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm nobody. I'm never going to be able to do this. Right. And so I did this study where I created this instrument that will differentiate between leadership and management. So I can have you fill out this thing, and it will tell me, when I say, hey, you're a leader, will you think leader or will you think manager? Because the two are actually different. And so in that process, I had a 3-star, Lieutenant General Joe DeSalvo. He participated in that study. And so I contacted him later and I was like, hey, I just want to talk to you about leadership stuff. I want to get your wisdom, right? Like, I mean, anytime you can talk to a 3-star dude, that's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I talked to him and we're talking, and I said, hey, I got this crazy idea. I want to do this, I want to do a scientific study where I interview all these 4-stars and I get all their perspectives and I get their stories. He's like, yeah, that sounds great. I said, can you connect me with a 4-star? He said, I don't know any. Are you joking? Like, you're a 3-star and you don't know any?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It's like, what? That's how,
It's a
isolated
small
these.
world. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's the, the level that we're talking about. Right. And so he said, but at that time I was on faculty at Stanford University School of Medicine. And he said, you're at Stanford, the Hoover Institute is there. Right. And they always have like a couple of 4-stars who are on their faculty. Maybe you could contact them. Maybe they would be willing to. Okay. And he said, and how about LinkedIn, right? Like maybe you could contact them on LinkedIn. And so, you don't want to be like, sir, you're insane. So, okay, yes, sir. I'll check that out. Thank you. And I'm thinking this guy's, like insane, right? Like that's never going to work. But it did.
Tom, that's just it. And I wanted to sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
It's so true, man. So in my community, the Stronghold, I did a networking course, and it's free for everybody. And it's my philosophy on networking, and it's a really simple philosophy: get the fuck out of your own way and reach out to these people.
Right? Yeah.
It's really that simple. And I'll give you an example. Walt Morgan is probably the highest ranking guy I've had on my podcast. He was a full bird colonel. He was also a helicopter pilot. It's one of my best conversations. I also had another full bird colonel and David Fivecoat on this show. And this was really early on as I was doing interviews on this show. I still didn't have confidence in myself. And I was medically retired as an E6, should have been an E7, but they don't promote you in the med board. You know how that all goes, whatever. Mm-hmm. I had this kind of false notion of myself where even someone like you, I was, as a private, I drove for Colonel Wood, a lieutenant colonel. I was also a sergeant major's driver at one point for Sergeant Major Costin. So I've got experience operating in the military around higher ranking individuals as a lower ranking guy. But I carried this thing with me where like, I'm not smart enough, or I can't hold a conversation with these people, particularly like full birds and above, because they're just, as an E6 in an infantry unit, you don't really interact with those guys ever. They show up for a division run or a brigade run, and they might, shake a hand here or there, pin an award on you, but it's empty. Like they don't know who you are or whatever, right? And then I had Walt on the show, and that's back when I was doing longer 2.5, 3-hour long episodes. I love the long form content. I love the conversations. It really lets me get in the weeds with people. However, it doesn't make for like a new podcast starting out to get viewers really well or retention. But that to this day, Walt and David Fivecoat's episodes are some of my best performing episodes. And I don't know, I can't figure out why, but I was able to hold my own in those conversations. And it's pretty amazing when you get to discover that about yourself. And like, I was pointing out things to them that I had discovered through this show that they hadn't considered as people who I would consider have, an expert degree in leadership. So I say all of that to say, like, you were thinking that this 3-star was crazy, telling you to reach out to them on LinkedIn and to, as a member of faculty at Stanford, to reach out to the people that are on staff that are also really coworkers of yours. And that's honestly all it takes, is for you to get out of your own way and just ask these people, because at the end of the day, they're like you and I are, Tom. They put their pants on one leg at a time. There's nothing that makes them special or unapproachable or unable to talk to you. And kind of now where I'm at, like worst case scenario, like they want to be a dick to me. Well, that's fine because rank doesn't matter anymore. I don't give a fuck that you're a 4-star. Like I'm a human, you're a human. Either you want to talk to me or you don't, and I'll go find somebody who will talk to me, and it'll be a much better conversation because they're actually interested and you're not.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we do get in our own way, and we have this idea that these people are unapproachable, and except for maybe a couple, okay, one in particular, but all of them, I mean, like that. The first person that I interviewed, okay, the only one that I was starstruck by. The rest of them is like, wow, this is really cool. Okay, Jim Mattis.
You know
that
what?
Dude, straight out of the gate, the first one, General Mattis.
That's fucking awesome, dude.
Like that dude. Another time he contacted me. He said, "Hey, I'm going to be on campus. Do you want to have lunch?" I had moved to a different.
100%.
You know what? I had moved across the country by that point. I hadn't told him, and so literally, I was trying to figure out. Okay, in the next 48 hours, is it possible for me to change my call schedule, buy a ticket, fly back to California, show up on Monday, and have lunch with that dude? You know, like that. I mean, it's just insane to me, right? Like, so because I told my wife, if there's anybody on earth that I would like to have dinner with, General Mattis is the person. Like I just hold him in such regard, right? So he was the first one out of the gate. And then, I'm interviewing these folks and I asked them, hey, can you connect me with other 4-stars? Because it's a little guild they have, right? And they'd say, let me send out an email to some of my folks and if they want to, they'll contact you, right? And so I had a goal at first, I'm going to do 50, which is insane. There are only about 250 living at any given time, right? And so I was like, I'm going to do 50. Okay. And I did this as a study, right? So I asked them all the same 4 questions. What are the 3 most important leadership lessons you learned across your career? Can you give me a story for each one of those, right? Like how that played out. A leadership lesson you learned the hard way, like you screwed that joker up. How do you want to be remembered? So talking about legacy. And 5 leadership maxims you always try to keep in mind, right? And dude, they delivered in freaking truckloads. I mean, just like there's stories that literally peeling back the curtain of history to see what was going on. You know what I mean? Like, holy crap. Nobody knows that. Like that happened and you were there. Like you were driving the boat or whatever it may be, right? And that stuff happened. And, like Admiral Walsh, Pat Walsh, okay, he was the Pacific Fleet commander when the tsunami hit Japan, right? And it moved Japan like 7 feet or something crazy. Nobody knew how to deal with that, right? And he was the guy that was there to try to figure out with this group of people, like, how the hell do we deal with this, right? And so from that to Afghanistan and Iraq and to even out in the public sector, because these guys and women, have retired, but they're still leaders, right? Like they're CEOs of big companies or university presidents or, and I have them on my show right now. I mean, they're still giving to me, right? Like I'm like, hey, General Lyles, would you be on my? Oh yeah. And then something happens. It's like, hey, I'm sorry to cancel on our meeting tomorrow, but the president called, or I need to, NASA needs me for this. It's like, that's so crazy, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so then I got going interviewing these folks, and I got Gus Perna. Okay, he's the guy who did Operation Warp Speed, right? Like he's from Jersey, like just Jersey, but man, that dude is just awesome. Okay, just phenomenal, dude. And he was on. The last person that I interviewed for the study was Marty Dempsey. Okay. Chairman of the Joint. So I had 3 chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in my.
Did you have Admiral Mullins?
No, I tried to get him, but he was, he was busy and so forth. Never could connect with him, and there were some people, like I email these folks. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this study of 4-stars and and so forth. Would you be interested? And I had this one guy basically he was going to do it. And then he said he talked to some folks, and basically they told him, hey, be careful. This may be a shady operation. It was like, so he responded like, I've been told I probably should not, be involved in this thing or whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm on the up and up, but whatever,
Yeah.
but it's understandable, right? I mean, these folks, I mean, I had one guy, so I actually interviewed 52, but one of them was off the record because he wanted to talk to me about leadership, but he didn't want to, some of these people, 4 stars get thrown under the bus just like everybody else. Okay.
Well,
Sometimes folks
I
down
think not
in,
only that, but they've got so much, I guess, correspondence coming their way of
oh
people wanting,
yeah,
right? So I would equate it to, right, like as you and I, right, poor kids from the Midwest,
yeah,
the smack dab Midwest where there's no industry or anything like that. We spend our whole lives not knowing what opportunity is, right? So when we get opportunity, like, well, I don't know when this is coming again, so I got to take this. I don't
right,
care what
exactly. Grab that
I
joker.
don't right what it does to my image, like if it's good or bad for me, right? And so again, over the last year, that's been one of the biggest pain points for me is learning how to say no to opportunity because it's coming my way faster than I could have ever dreamed of, right? And you
Yeah,
do get yourself into trouble. You'll do something like embarrassing story. I know to grow a podcast, you need to be a guest on a bunch of other podcasts. So I go sign up for podcast guesting, platforms, and then I end up on some Indian that are just being broadcast in India. And I'm like, well, this isn't really going to help my cause or anything like that.
right.
And
Yeah,
right, like it's just lessons you have to learn along the way. And so it's understandable that they would come back to you and be like, I heard this may not be good for me. Like
yeah,
I mean, it's how do you filter through? Because we can't imagine what kind of
right.
opportunity they're presented with on a daily basis, for sure. I get it.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of them have gatekeepers and people that you got, and all this sort of stuff, and that is understandable because again, there aren't many of these people, and everybody's clamoring for their insight, and some of it seriously is national because they're still involved, right?
Right.
Like when it's hitting like the fan in Ukraine, those are the folks who are getting called
Yeah.
by the people who are active duty right now. They're like, "Hey, what is your advice on this? What do you think?" Right? And so I understand that and I respect that. So all these folks, right? Like 51 of them get to ask these questions, get to hear all their stories and just stories that just again blow your mind. I took all those data, I recorded them all, then we did a real analysis of that to try to figure out, right? Like when we're talking about certain things, what are we really saying? You analyze everything that they say and what are they saying really, and what's the theme of this, and okay, here they're talking about character, and there they're talking about battle space, and here they're talking about whatever. So analyzed all that scientifically, brought it together, looked at the major themes. You asked kind of what are the big things come out of this? The 4 stars of leadership, as I call them. Okay, all C's: character, competence, caring, and communication. And you mentioned those earlier, in at the outset of the podcast. And those 4 things, you got to have them if you're going to be really exceptional leader. And it starts with character. I mean, General Charles Krulak, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps, right? I mean, he got agitated with me when I sent him the list of folks I'd already interviewed for this study because there was at least one person in that list that he identified that he said that doesn't have character. And character is the only thing that is leadership is all about character. And he's a Marine, right? So
Yeah. I
boom.
was I was curious about that because you did 52 of these. I was wondering if there was going to be pushback from other generals once you sent a list, like because it's like anything else, right? Like, yes, I understand it's a significant achievement to get a fourth star, but people slip through the cracks. It doesn't matter from the regular, Army basic infantry soldier to the special forces guy to the Delta guy. They slip through the cracks all the time. Well, I wouldn't think that a 4 star would be any different. And I mean, we can look at some political history to see that like there's some 4 stars that again, don't have character. Like, it's very obvious, you know what I mean? That, so I think I bet it was a fun process is what
Man, I've told folks, right? Like, I take care of kids whose hearts are abnormal, right? And so the fulfillment that you can get out of that and how much that means. But I have not done anything in my professional life that's had a more profound impact on me than this project, than getting to meet these people, to know them, to have them call me by my first name, to ask me to call them by their first name, to hear their stories, to interact with them. Again, a lot of them now on the Science of Leadership, my podcast, a lot of them have agreed to come back and be guests on that and share some of these exciting stories and other things that we talk about. And I'm a better person, man. I am a better person. I'm a better husband and a father and a friend and a physician because of the stuff that I've learned from these folks. It's been awesome.
I love it, dude. When is the book coming out?
That's a great question. So I'm in the process of what's called copy editing right now. So I've got it with a person who's working on that. My goal is summer, have it in print by the summer.
That's awesome, man. It's funny because a couple of weeks ago I was a guest on one of the larger podcasts I've had the opportunity to go on, and the host challenged me to write my own book because she thinks that Adam Peters needs to have a book about the transition and everything. It basically came about because I'm doing something similar to what you did. I've taken all the transcripts from all of the podcasts that I've recorded, every single one of them, all 102 of them, and I'll continue to add to this. And I've identified 15 things that we struggle with in the transition, essentially. And basically, the book is going to cover those 15 things using my own transition story from November 2nd, 2015, the first day I was medically retired. And then moving forward, it's my entire journey, and then I'm weaving in lessons. And I think it's funny how the universe kind of brought us together, because I started this project before you had filled out the form to come on my show. And now I'm getting to have this conversation with you. And in the third chapter, because I'm already that far in this thing, but I was writing about my experience with General Odierno, who I then discovered had passed away, which sucks because, again, on I think my second deployment, I had the opportunity to meet General Odierno, who came out to our COP and spent 2 whole days with it. He didn't leave. He stayed with us and treated us like real human beings. And this man's like 6'5". He's a giant. He's an awesome dude. And he was just one of the guys. He wasn't your typical, because I've had interactions with, for example, training at Fort Stewart with a 4-star who flies in on his Black Hawk, and his aides put his kit on for him. And then he just runs around and like, don't bother me. Where's the battalion commander? I need to talk to him. You're nobody. Right? General Odierno, he didn't give a shit about the leadership. He wanted to talk to the guys who were in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sticks out in my mind. I don't think you had the opportunity. I think he had passed away before you started your project.
Right.
So I think he would have been a great one to talk to, man, because he went on to do some great things after leading the surge and being Allied Forces commander. And I mean, so much cool stuff. But, again, in writing this book, I get to pick up on some of these leadership things like what you're doing. And it's just fate that we get to have this conversation today, and I get to make a friend out of you. And I'm sure I'll reach back out to you as I start finishing my book and kind of get some lessons and whatnot. But it's just amazing, like what we become capable of when we get out of our own ways and we start believing in ourselves. And I think that's your whole message here is like, follow your own path, because you did it. You went to medical school, you joined the Army, you decided the Army wasn't doing you any favors because they made you a non-deployable asset, which didn't align with your core values and beliefs, because you wanted to be over there fighting the fight, which again caused some personal, feelings that I hopefully have encouraged you to let go of, because you should be proud of your service, no matter what the capacity is, man. Just because you didn't get on a deployment and somebody like me has 5 years of combat time, it doesn't make us any different. We both served our country, just in different capacities. And, and then you choose to follow this path, and it leads you to getting to have conversations with 52 4-star generals. That's no small feat, man. That's amazing. And I'm proud to know you, dude. I'm proud to know that you're out there writing this book to condense these lessons, because you read 130 books on leadership. I assume there's some Goggins stuff in there, some Jocko stuff in there. There's Rumsfeld stuff, some Colin Powell stuff, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm.
All these great leaders. I'm sure Mattis's stuff, if he's written
Mm-hmm.
anything, I think he has, right?
Call sign chaos. Yeah.
There you go. And you identify like this gap, and you're like, well, let me take a different approach to this. And through 52 conversations, you narrowed it down to 4 core things: character, competence, caring, and communication. I think this is going to be a powerful book, brother. I think it's going to be awesome.
Thanks.
And I can't wait to see, Tom Collins and the four star leaders book at the top of the New York Times bestseller in the leadership category, because there's so many leadership books out there right now. And that's why I was apprehensive to write a book, because it's kind of flirting that line with leadership. Like, I don't want to write another leadership book that's going to get lost in the sauce. I want to write something that a specialist who is unfortunate in getting med boarded can read and understand that he's not alone in his transition. And this is what you can expect, right? And I think that's the approach that you took, is like, I want to really find out what leadership is all about. So let me go to the people who are best at it. I think it's amazing.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. It's exciting. And as you say, like in working on this thing, my goal was, if somebody dropped me and 10 other people on a desert island and I had to lead them through this thing, what's the book that I would want, right? Like Swiss Army knife of books, essentially, right? The one thing, because so many books, having read now 320 some, I think it is, leadership books, so many books are about one thing, right? Like this one single idea, right? Like, your why or whatever it may be, right? Well, it's leadership is so complex. And so trying to make a framework that is approachable, that you can remember, that you can take with you and realize in any role, that was the goal of this book. And so, man, I'm excited about it. I think I really hope that it's a great resource for folks, and that it helps us all be better.
Yeah, man, I agree with you. So many of those leadership books are about one thing. I think that's detrimental to us as consumers of knowledge, because we try to then build a framework around that one thing, where you're trying to, here's the framework, now just go experiment and take action, right? You have the 4 core things that you always need to keep in mind. It makes it so much easier to not get lost in the sauce as a leader. And I love your approach, man. So that being said, I've taken us way over time. I apologize, but the conversation is just way too good. Tell everybody how they can reach out to you, find everything that you have going on in the medical profession. So, if they've got a sick kid with a bad heart, and you've said some things here that, maybe you're their doctor, or how they can follow the leadership work that you're doing, or anything else you want people to be able to reach out to you for, man. That's what this platform is about, is establishing connections, making people feel more approachable to others. You never know who this is going to help, man. So just tell them how they can get in touch with you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, Adam, thanks so much for a great opportunity, conversation here. It's been a blast. It's great to hear some of your story. I really appreciate what you're doing. What you're doing is so vitally important and valued. And so, man, kudos to you for that. As far as stuff for me, with regard to the leadership space, I do have, as I mentioned, the Science of Leadership podcast. We put out weekly episodes. You can find that on YouTube at the Science of Leadership, or for instance, we host on our podcast on Podbean. So it's scienceofleadership.podbean.com, and we can include that in show notes and so forth, certainly. But so those would be some ways. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the University of Kentucky. I specialize in children and in adults with connective tissue disorders, and those are special genetically mediated things that affect the heart and the arteries. And so Williams syndrome, Marfan syndrome, Loeys-Dietz, and other things. So if somebody happens to have somebody who has that in their family, and you don't know who I am yet, then look me up at the University of Kentucky. I'd be happy to provide any care that you might need for that. But ultimately, this passion for trying to help us all be better through leadership is where I feel like I'm being drawn. So anyway,
Well, I think
thanks,
you should
man.
continue to go that direction, brother. Thank you so much for your time today, Tom. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, and this was great, dude. I can't wait to put this out. For everybody listening, please help me achieve my goal. We're running out of time. It's almost the new year. May 9th, 2025, I turn 40. I want to get this podcast in front of 1 million veterans by the time I turn 40. It's a lofty goal, but there's 19 million veterans in the United States. If you all take 2 seconds to hit the little share arrow, I know you all know where it's at. We can do that. It's really not that hard. It takes 2 seconds of your time. It's not a big ask. Please do that. Also, like, share, rate, review, download, all that good stuff. Everything helps. Man, another great episode with Dr. Tom Collins and leadership and everything else. I can't wait to see what 2025 is going to bring our way as this show evolves and we get more guests. And I'm going to have a little chat with Tom after we sign off here and see if he might be able to get me my first 4-star general, because that'd be really cool. But until next week, we'll see you guys later. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another banger of an episode next week. Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Tom.